it's a cult that is extorting its members for insane amounts of money, or a leader who convinces their followers to commit horrifying crimes, and all of the absurd and bizarre behavior of cults in between. This list is full of crazy cults in history. I am Olivia, your host today, and we are going to be counting down the top 10 scariest cults that committed unspeakable acts. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. This cult with the catchiest name was founded in Uganda by 4 ex-Roman Catholic priests, 2 ex-nuns, and 1 former sex worker, and it was initially said to really emphasize the 10 Commandments. Apparently, these leaders thought that the Roman Catholic Church had really just abandoned the 10 Commandments, and they wanted to bring back some rules. They couldn't just focus on these rules, however, they also had to have some sort of doomsday prophecy as well, like all good cults do. They claimed that the apocalypse would come on December 31st, 1999, and in anticipation of this, a bunch of the members sold all of their possessions, so of course, they were pretty irritated when the world in fact did not end. The leaders scrambled and instead altered their predictions, saying that the Virgin Mary would instead come on March 17th, 2000, and that she would bring them all to heaven. The followers continued to believe this, and on March 16th, they had a huge feast. The following day, on March 17th, police arrived to where the cult resided and found that an explosion and fire killed hundreds of members of the group. At first, they thought this could have been a voluntary event, but soon they saw the signs that pointed to this being a mass killing. The leaders likely took the lives of the followers because they could not pay them back, and they also knew that their quote-unquote prophecies were false. At first, it was thought that the leaders were among those whose bodies were found, but that isn't quite the case. No one is exactly sure if they ended up losing their lives, or if they instead fled the country, which many believe to be the case. At this point, there is still a warrant out for their arrest, so while the authorities have never officially confirmed that they are on the run, it truly is the most likely scenario. In our number 9 spot today, we have Aum Shinrikyo. This cult was founded by a man named Shoko Asahara, and he claimed to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. He said that he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Apparently, those who were the most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. Not really seeing the connection on that one, to be totally honest, but those are just the facts. The cult continued to grow and drew in influential and wealthy people, and this is where things really took a turn for the worst. This group went on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then, in 1995, they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. In the end, Asahara and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged for these crimes, and after standing trial, they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Narcosatanists. Founded by a man named Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, he was at one point a drug dealer and also the leader of a horrifying cult that was nicknamed the Narcosatanists by the media. Adolfo's followers believed that he had magical abilities, but in the worst way possible. He required his followers to kidnap young men, who Adolfo would practice horrible, sadistic rituals on, and ultimately take their lives in order to replenish this magic that didn't exist. It's an absolutely horrific story, and this carried on for years until the disappearance of Mark Kilroy. Mark was a Texas college student who was in Mexico for some fun over spring break in 1989, but sadly during this trip he was taken by the cult's followers. Mark's friends quickly noticed his disappearance and began searching for him, and this led to a border-crossing manhunt, and authorities quickly revealed what had been going on, but Adolfo had already fled. He and 4 of his followers fled to Mexico City, and this is how he was finally caught. Police were called to the apartment they were staying at as a result of a totally unrelated dispute, but because Adolfo knew that they were looking for him, he just assumed that they were there for him, and he opened fire with a machine gun. Not wanting to go to prison, he then handed the weapon over to one of his followers and asked him to open fire on himself, and by the time the police were able to reach the apartment, he was already dead. In the end, 14 cult members were charged for their crimes relating to everything that went on. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Children of God. Karen Zerbe is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, but is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who is one of the founders of the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult, and all the while, Karen was extremely elusive, so much so that some of the followers didn't even know what she looked like. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who is one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about it. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison, and she still remains in hiding, living off of what money she could collect from followers. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rajneesh Movement. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh first became known in the 1960s as he traveled through India speaking out against socialism as well as aspects of mainstream religion. While speaking out about these things, he also advocated for a more open attitude when it came to human sexuality, and it's this stance that quickly earned him the nickname the Sex Guru. By the 1980s, he had taken his teachings to the United States, where he opened a facility known as Rajneesh Puram in Wasco County, Oregon, but this quickly upset the locals in the area. Not only were there legal battles surrounding his construction, but there were also crimes being committed by the followers of the Rajneesh movement. And we're talking about really serious crimes. There was a mass food poisoning attack with the Salmonella bacteria, which marked the first known bioterrorism attack in the history of the United States. And if this wasn't bad enough, there was also the attempted assassination of United States Attorney Charles H. Turner. Rajneesh didn't take any responsibility for these crimes and instead blamed his personal secretary and her supporters, but despite this denial, he still found himself deported, after which he returned to India. Here he continued to run the Poon Ashram until his death in 1990. Honestly, the story is absolutely bonkers, the crimes are massive, and the entire thing is just very bizarre. In our number 5 spot today, we have NXIVM. This cult was founded by a man named Keith Rainier, and on the surface level, they marketed this group as a multi-level marketing company, but instead it was definitely a cult and a front for disgusting crimes. Keith started off this multi-level marketing career with the company Amway, and by 1990 he had started his own, which ended up getting shut down for being a pyramid scheme. In 1998, NXIVM was founded and was originally called a personal development company and was supposed to help with self-improvement. There was a 12-point mission statement which was recited during the cult classes where they purged themselves of all envy-based habits. There were different modules for classes like relationship sourcing, which helped the members explore ways that they could financially benefit if their partner passed away suddenly, or another class where they only learned about psychopaths and their followers. Eventually, the cult leaders started to branch out and form different organizations related to the cult, and long story long, this cult was not for self-improvement, but was involved in some extremely terrible things. In 2018, Keith was arrested and charged, and in June of 2019, he was convicted for conspiracy and conspiracy to commit forced labor, as well as a few other really awful things, and all of these charges were related to NXIVM. This story really blew up, especially due to the celebrity involvement of actor Allison Mack, who was also arrested for her involvement in the cult. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Manson Family. Started by the horrible Charles Manson, this story starts off when Manson was released from prison in 1967, where he then moved to San Francisco, where he gained a small following that would eventually go on to be the cult known as the Family. The group eventually moved to an abandoned ranch outside of Los Angeles, and it was here that Manson continued to brainwash his followers and manipulate them with his own religious philosophies. He is quoted as saying, quote, "I'm God to my friends, I'm the devil to my enemies. When I look to the future, I'm the prophet. When I must lay down the law for our earth, I'm the son of man." Manson claimed that there would be an upcoming race war in which white people would be killed, which was intended to instill fear in his followers. This was so that he could ignite a race war and send his followers on a killing spree, which ended up being the night of the horrible Tate and LaBianca killings. This led to a reign of terror in the Los Angeles area for several months because people just couldn't understand how or why this happened. In our number 3 spot today, we have Heaven's Gate. Started by Marshall Applewhite and his former partner Bonnie Nettles, the two founded the well-known cult Heaven's Gate. These two believed themselves to be something called walk-ins, which they said are higher beings who took control over the bodies of two middle-aged humans so as to spread their word and teach humanity. People who believed their story and were drawn in by the idea of these higher beings were of course being manipulated and taken advantage of, which is all too common in these cult stories and really is the basis for most of these kinds of stories. They gave up their lives and all worldly possessions in the belief that Earth was to be recycled cult, and the only way to continue surviving would be to leave immediately. The time to leave Earth came in March of 1997 when Marshall claimed that they had a spacecraft that was traveling to the comet Hale-Bopp. The catch with this spacecraft, however, well, Marshall told them that they needed to stage all taking their own lives in order for the UFO to take them to another level of existence above humans. 39 members of this cult, including Marshall himself, took their lives over the course of the next few days. This was the largest event of this kind since the next point we're going to talk about, which brings me to number 2, the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. Jim Jones is certainly one of the most well-known people on this list for all of the wrong reasons. He is the man who claimed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi, and he founded the cult, which was originally called Wings of Deliverance, but he later changed the name to the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. After an expose in the New West magazine about the things going on in this cult, he ended up moving the group from the United States to Guyana. From here, there were claims of horrible things and human rights violations, which led to an investigation. People found out that some of the supposed members of this cult were actually being held against their will. In the end, with all of this going on, Jim managed to convince his followers to all take their lives in one massive, horrible event, and this day has gone on to become known as the Jonestown Massacre. A total of 918 people died that day, including Jim. In our number 1 spot today, we have Synanon. What originally started out as a drug rehabilitation program founded by Charles Diedrich in 1958, things quickly changed and this began to turn into a sort of group that shared these truth-telling sessions. At first, it was known as The Game before the 1970s when Synanon was officially born. The founder, Charles, as he began to get some kind of power, he grew greedy and hungry for more. This led to him starting to charge insane fees for his members, as well as forcing the members to do extreme physical labor. This is all bad enough, but it gets worse. Anyone who tried to shut this little community down would be met with an attempted hit on their life. Charles developed a list for anyone who challenged Synanon, and this included a lawyer by the name of Paul Morantz, who actually almost died as a result of the hit that Charles had put on him. In 1991, Synanon finally met its end when it was shut down for tax fraud, destruction of evidence, and terrorism, and Charles passed away just 6 years later. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again very soon. Goodbye!